right, greetings out there. We're trying to cast the evil spirits out of the technology.
Be gone.
So we had sort of a false start, so hopefully this time everything's working. And I'm getting thumbs up from our producers, so looks like we're good to go.
Praise the Lord.
But we are here for Pastor's Perspective, which we do every Friday from about 2 to 3 Central Standard Time. My name is Dr. Andy Woods. I'm the pastor teacher here at Sugarland Bible Church, and I'm here with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Jim McGowan, who's one of our elders here at the church, among many other roles and titles and responsibilities. I'm here with my producer, Gabe Morris, who doesn't want to be identified, so I just blew that. And my wife, Ann Woods, is back there busy helping with things. So we're all here really trying to let the Lord use us. And
Yes.
So what we're trying to do in these pastors' perspectives is bring, really hot items before the body of Christ. And, you remember we were involved in a discussion concerning pastoral ministry
Yes.
philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of interrupted that because of the holidays. And guess what? We're going to interrupt it again because there's a brand new issue that's come before us that we want to talk about, and time is of the essence on this. It's sort of like on the news when it says breaking news, and then something else comes in, it says breaking news.
Yeah.
And so we're going to get back to, later on this month, the issue of ministry philosophy. But for the time being, I want to switch subjects because of something that's just come up. And this has to do with the idea of Israel and whether the nation of Israel is illegally occupying Palestinian land. Let me, before we get into the nuts and bolts of this, let me take you to the end game. Regarding the nation of Israel, what does the world community want? What does the Obama administration want? And I like to put up an image. This is image number 1, we'll call it. And what you see there in front of you is the nation of Israel. And that yellow area is something that the world community calls the West Bank. Now, when we use this expression West Bank, we have to understand that we're using a definition from the Jordanian point of view.
Yeah.
Because that area really is not west related to Israel. It's east of Israel.
Right.
But from the Jordanian point of view, it's called the West Bank. So I don't even like to use the word West Bank because words mean things.
Yes.
The proper definition of that yellow area there is called Judea and Samaria. And that's the name of the game today in the world community. And what are these folks basically trying to do? They're trying to take that yellow area that you just saw in that image, and they're trying to create there what's called a Palestinian state. Now, do you have that quote from Abbas? Abbas is the leader of the Palestinian Authority. And you don't have to read that whole thing. If you can just read that emboldened, underlined section. This is from the Jerusalem Post. And he made this statement in Cairo, Egypt on July 30th, 2013. And he kind of reveals what the real goal is for this area called the West Bank, better called Judea and Samaria. What does he say there?
Yeah, this is Mahmoud Abbas, and this is what he says. In a final resolution, we would not see the presence of a single Israeli, civilian or soldier, on our lands.
What he's talking about there is a Jew-free area.
Yes.
That's what the world community wants. They want to take that area called Judea and Samaria. They want to turn it into what they call a Palestinian state. And, it's kind of interesting with all of the talk today in our world about racial discrimination. Isn't that just blatant racial discrimination?
Sure seems like it to me.
You take the heart of Israel and you say no Jew can sojourn there or be a citizen there. And this is the end game.
Yeah.
This is what the Obama administration wants. This is what the world community wants. If you saw that image, you'll see that part of that territory, if I understood it right, it goes right into Jerusalem. And so that would even include, if I'm not mistaken, East Jerusalem. And it would even include the Wailing Wall.
Yeah.
And things of this nature. And the world community uses a term over and over again for this. They call this the two-state solution.
Right.
And this is what they want.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of just setting the stage for what we're going to be talking about in a second. If you take a look at image number 2, can we get that up? This is not just the Middle East, but it gets into Africa, African nations, and the nations surrounding Israel. And those red nations there are Islamic nations. And that tiny area, we had to actually draw an arrow to it, people might not be able to see it, is the nation of Israel. And so what the world community is basically saying is Israel, which is just a little speck of a country, needs to divide, even further.
Right.
And when you look at some statistics on this, Israel is surrounded by 21 nations. Israel is one nation. Those nations, as you saw on that map, are about 640 times Israel's size. Israel is about 1/19th the size of California. She's probably about the size of New Jersey. Those other nations have a combined population of 250 million people, connected to 1.4 billion Muslims worldwide.
Yeah.
Israel is a nation of about 13 million. She should be 20 million, but Adolf Hitler did a pretty good job shrinking her number. And all of those nations that we've examined are basically dictatorships. Israel is the sole democrat republic in that part of the world. Those other nations represent most of the world's oil supply. Israel potentially has only a few potential oil discoveries. Those other nations have a limited desire for peace. Very few of them, other than maybe Egypt and Jordan, have expressed a desire to live peacefully alongside Israel. Israel, on the other hand, does have a desire for peace.
Yes.
Those other nations are controlled by what's called the Quran, which demands worldwide submission.
Yes.
Israel is bound by Torah, which promises her that little tiny strip of real estate.
Yeah.
So you can see how unfair it is when you just look at it from a geographical perspective, how unfair it is for the world community to demand that Israel divide, even further. And if we can put up image 1 a second time, I want the listeners to see this. The distance from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea as you travel westward is about 44 miles. Now, if Judea and Samaria, or so-called the West Bank, becomes a Palestinian state, you reduce the width of Israel from 45 miles to 9 miles. Now, you're a pilot, aren't you?
I am.
So you know more about this than I do, but it takes about 10 miles to shoot down a plane that's coming to attack you. And if you reduce Israel to that small length, she doesn't really have a lot of hope, does she, in terms of shooting down planes. And Daniel Horowitz, in an article that we recommend to you that you can find online, we're going to be building a lot of our thoughts today off this article. It's entitled, "Israel's Right to Build Homes is Settled Under International Law." He wrote this December 27th, 2016 in Conservative Review. He calls these lines that the world community wants to establish, he calls these the Auschwitz lines. Because you're placing Israel into a position where she literally cannot defend itself. Should Judea and Samaria become a Palestinian state. Yet, this is what the nations of the earth want. I think, Jim, a lot of this is setting the stage for the 7-year tribulation period.
No question.
Because one of the things that will start, the event that will start the tribulation period, will be a peace treaty between the Antichrist and Israel.
Yes.
In fact, you want to read that? Can you read Daniel 9 and verse 27 to us?
I'd be happy to. This is Daniel 9:27, reading out of the New American Standard Bible 95 edition. And this is what it says. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate.
So that's a very famous passage of the 70th week of Daniel,
Yes.
which is a description of the 7-year tribulation period. And did you notice what starts that time period? It's a
Covenant.
It's a covenant
Yeah.
between the Antichrist and Israel. So if you remove from Israel Judea and Samaria and turn that into a Palestinian state and reduce her length from 45 miles to 9 miles, and you put her in an indefensible position, you basically put her in a position where she has to sign this deal with the Antichrist.
That's right.
So if the world community gets away with this, I think it's largely table setting, if you will, for the coming 7-year tribulation period.
Yeah.
Do you have Isaiah 28 and verse 15?
I do. Isaiah 28:15 says this, "Because you have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with Sheol we have made a pact. The overwhelming scourge will not reach us when it passes by. For we have made falsehood our refuge, and we have concealed ourselves with deception."
See, it talks in the book of Isaiah about a pact with death that Israel will make. And a lot of people, including myself, believe that's an allusion or a reference to this peace treaty that one day Israel will enter into with the Antichrist. And so, I'm bringing this up to people to show them what is happening before their eyes. Bible prophecy is coming together, perhaps like it's never before come together in human history.
Yes.
And the Lord is really setting the stage for what's coming. And these events related to a two-state solution and the ambitions of the world community, relate directly to this. But, it's really unfair to Israel to push her in this position. And can we put up image one more time? You'll notice there on the bank of the Mediterranean shore there, a little tiny red dot. And that is an area, it's basically down in the southern part of the map, so it would be basically south west there on the map. It's a little tiny dot there, it's called Gaza. And if people have any delusions about whether this two-state solution will work, you just need to think about Gaza. Because what happened is the nation of Israel gave Gaza back to the so-called Palestinians. And you know how many elections they had? They had one in Gaza once they became independent. And you know who they elected? Do you remember? They elected Hamas. And this was around 2005 this was done. And what has Hamas done with that territory subsequent to that giving back of that territory by Israel to Hamas? They've built tunnels by which to kidnap and attack the Jews. They use it as a beachhead to launch rockets. So people say we need a two-state solution. Well, we already have a two-state solution. It's called what's going on in Gaza. And what's happening in Gaza will be replicated multiple times over should the Jews capitulate to the world community and give up give up Judea and Samaria. So where am I going with all this, Jim? You're probably asking. I want to get into the subject of illegality. Is the nation of Israel, by living in Judea and Samaria and building settlements in Judea and Samaria, are they involved in illegal activity? Because the world community wants Judea and Samaria to be part of the two-state solution. So here's the line they keep using. Israel is illegally occupying that territory.
Right.
Israel is in violation of international law by occupying that territory. Israel, by building settlements in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, is an occupier, violating international law, engaged in illegalities. And I want to expose that today.
Yeah.
I want to show people
Amen.
that is a complete lie. There's
Yes.
not a truth. There's not a shred of truth to that. We want to demonstrate it historically. And I even think that this idea of the Jews as illegal occupiers is probably one of the greatest hoaxes perpetrated. I put it on equal level with evolution.
Yeah.
You know, masses of people believe evolution is true.
Right.
Masses of people believe global warming is true.
Mm-hmm.
Here we are in Texas. We're freezing to death on this January morning. I don't see a lot of global warming here in Houston. I can't remember what the temperature is outside, but
It's cold.
it's cold, and we don't get a lot of cold temperature out here, so we're grateful for it. But you know, masses of people believe in global warming. 34 degrees, I've just been told. Masses of people believe in evolution, global warming, and masses of people believe that Israel is doing something illegal by living on or building settlements on Judea and Samaria and into Jerusalem. In fact, you have that quote by, I think his name's William James. He's called the father of modern day psychology. He says something very interesting.
Yes, indeed. William James is considered the father of modern psychology, and he once said, "There is nothing so absurd, but if you repeat it often enough, people will believe it."
Isn't that true?
Well, there it is.
You just repeat a lie frequently enough, and then people will believe it's true.
That's right.
So what people hear all of the time in the news is Israel is doing something illegal. She's occupying territory that doesn't belong to her.
She's the aggressor.
She's the aggressor. And so your average person hears that. It's never challenged.
Right.
And so they look at the Jews in the Middle East, the reborn state of Israel, and they look at it as an illegal nation in violation of international law. Just to give you some modern examples of it, President Obama, September 20th, 2016, gave his final address to the UN. And there's a line in that speech that just really stands out. Can you read that line to us?
I sure can. This is what our president says, September 20th, 2016, to the UN. He said, "Israel recognizes that it cannot permanently occupy and settle Palestinian land."
Yeah, he's basically saying Israel needs to recognize that it cannot, look what he says, permanently occupy and settle Palestinian land.
When did it become Palestinian
When did
land?
it become Palestinian land? And you notice the word occupy.
I do see that, yeah.
So it's this idea that Israel is there doing something
Right.
illegal in violation of international law. Now let me fast forward to December 23rd, 2016, just before the new year, or the old year I should say, was coming to an end. And you'll notice there's a quote here. I think I have it marked as number 1. This was a UN resolution, and I believe the number was resolution 2334. It condemns. It was a United Nations resolution condemning Israel, condemning Israeli settlements. Now, in the Horowitz piece, which I alluded to earlier, he quotes that resolution. Can you read that resolution to us, or
Sure.
the key excerpt from it?
Yeah. The UN Security Council passed a resolution before the Christmas weekend that reaffirms that the establishment by Israel of settlements in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem, has no legal validity and constitutes a flagrant violation under international law.
So there's the United Nations saying Israel is doing something illegal.
Well, we're saying that over and over again, aren't
Over
we?
and over again.
Right?
By building settlements in Jerusalem, living in Judea and Samaria. Illegal, illegal, illegal. Violation of international law. Looking at this exact language, a flagrant violation of international law. And, you know, what's happening is Jews from all around the world, by God's providence, I believe, are returning to their homeland.
Yes.
It's exactly what the prophet Ezekiel, chapter 36, prophesied would happen in the last days. Now they need a place to live.
Yeah.
So when they start building settlements for a place to live, the world community says that Israel is doing something, illegal.
Right.
And it just, Jim, it just saddens me that the world community doesn't seem to care at all about the Iranians building nukes. Or the rise of ISIS or Al Qaeda or real threats that are actually transpiring around the globe. They're all caught up in Jewish settlements, and that's their whole focus. So the UN has to get together and make a resolution about this.
Yeah.
Now, where does America come in? America used to veto these things because she would sit. A single nation, the way the UN is set up, can veto these resolutions. Well, this time around it was different.
Yeah.
The Obama administration instructed Samantha Power, I believe her name is, who is the UN ambassador, to not veto it, but to abstain. Abstain. So in essence, that was an approval.
Yeah.
When the United States of America basically abstained. And this, to my knowledge, is one of the first times in American history that our country has moved this aggressively against Israel.
Yeah.
And this is the Obama administration's last act as they're leaving office. This is what they want to communicate. And you notice also, Brother Jim, that they do all this stuff after the November election's over?
Yeah.
Have you noticed that? This took place, what do we say, December 23rd, 2016. They didn't do it before the big election, the general election in early November. They wait till it's all over and they do this. So you have Obama's final speech to the UN, September 20th, 2016. You have this UN resolution, which America did not veto, but abstained from giving its acquiescence or approval to. December 23rd, 2016. Now let me flash forward a few more days. This is now to Secretary of State John Kerry. He gives a speech December 28th, 2016, and the speech goes for 72 minutes. Now, I'm a pastor of a church. I can barely get people to listen to me for that long a time. He gives a political speech. It's been called a Castro-like speech.
Oh, that's a great endorsement, isn't it?
That goes on for 72 minutes. Now, I watched some of it, and here's some of the language he uses to describe these Jewish settlements. Again, he's not worried about Iran. He's not worried about ISIS. He's not worried about Al Qaeda. He's upset about these Jewish settlements. Yeah. He calls them outposts. And notice the verbiage that's used here. These guys are very clever with their vocabulary. Right. Yes. They're making it sound like Israel is doing something illegal. Yeah. He uses the phrase, stop the march of settlements, not the march of ISIS or Al Qaeda, the march of settlements. And then he used this expression, Israel's action is exposing Israel to international prosecution. So your average Joe listening to that says, wow, Israel must be violating some flagrant law. And people say, well, that's old news. Quit talking about the year 2016. Talk about the year 2017. Okay, I will. This stuff that I'm talking about is not going away. Yeah. It may not be in the news this afternoon, but I guarantee you January 15th and January 16th, what I'm talking about is going to be all over the headlines because something big is coming down the road. January 15th, 2017. Can you read that excerpt from Arutz Shiva? All that is a headline, an introductory sentence related to what's right around the corner.
Arutz Shiva is the Israeli news network, Channel 7, and this is their quote. It says, French officials announced on Thursday that around 70 countries will gather in France on January 15th for a conference to throw the international community's weight behind a two-state solution in the Israeli-Palestinian Arab conflict.
See, so what Obama said to the UN, what the UN resolution said, what John Kerry said is now going to be reemphasized with this group of 70 nations, about 70 nations from the international community. They're coming together in Paris, France. It's right around the corner. What date is today? The 6th? This is just a little over a week away, on January 15th, 2017. And the whole goal of this confab or meeting is to throw their weight behind what else? A two-state solution.
Well, you know, if they weren't excited about doing it beforehand, the fact that they've seen us step back away from the table is just open the floodgate.
Yeah,
let's go for it.
It kind of whets the appetite.
It does, yeah.
America, the big dog, is doing it.
The blood's in the water.
So we'll do it too. Now, what are we going to get from this meeting? We're going to get more of the same.
Yes.
A two-state solution. West Bank needs to be removed from Jewish control, turned back over to what's called a Palestinian state. And more, we need to put, they won't say this, but we need to push Israel into an indefensible position. The verse that I'm always thinking of as I'm watching this parade of horribles is Zechariah 12 and verse 3. I can't think of a more specific verse that outlines our times than that. Can you read that?
Sure.
Zechariah chapter 12 and verse 3.
Zechariah 12:3. It will come about in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will be severely injured, and the nations of the earth, and all the nations of the earth, will be gathered against it.
So who's coming against Jerusalem in the last days? All the nations
All
of
the
the
nations of the earth. And here's 70 of them getting ready to.
There's 70 of them.
Right there.
And the late, great United States of America under Obama's leadership, John Kerry, Samantha Power. By the way, I was shocked to learn this. Do you know who Samantha Power, our UN ambassador, is married to? I didn't realize this until I started studying this. She's married to Cass Sunstein. Cass Sunstein is a guy who wrote a book called Nudge. And sort of the purpose of the book is for big government to push and nudge people into submission. It's kind of like a bully that kind of hits you gently, and then as you become more and more docile, he gets more and more aggressive. I mean, all of these people, Cass Sunstein, Samantha Power, Barack Obama, John Kerry, some of Obama's mentors, a guy named Rashid Khalidi, I could go on and on. They're all joined at the hip. And they're all promoting a very big government, one world socialist agenda. And apparently what's very big on their minds is this idea that Israel needs to give up the West Bank or Judea and Samaria. And that needs to be part of what's called a two-state solution. And what they're saying over and over again to kind of prepare the world for this is Israel is illegally occupying that territory. Now, I want to explode that myth. And I hope, folks, if you're listening to us, you'll get your comments and questions ready, because we're going to be dealing with comments and questions in just a little bit. Make sure to like us on Facebook and share this with your friends if you find this subject interesting. But I want to explode this myth that they're perpetrating, that Israel is doing something illegal. You know, Obama said it, Kerry said it, UN Resolution 2334 says it, the world community, January 15th, is ready to say the same thing. But is this true? And, you know, there are many ways we can discuss the nation of Israel. We can discuss the nation of Israel biblically, prophetically, politically, and we're not even appealing to that right now. The only thing we're talking about in this session is legally. Is the nation of Israel legally doing anything wrong by living in Judea and Samaria and building settlements in that part of the world? And the answer is they're not doing anything illegal. And I want to just show people why that is the case. There has never been a consistent, contiguous nation in the Middle East while the Jews were out of that land.
Right.
So Israel is pushed out in AD 70. They start to return around 1948. And if you listen to the news, they give you this impression that the Palestinians were there. and they had a beautiful, thriving civilization.
that's
And somehow
right.
Israel came in and just pushed the Palestinians out.
Right.
Do you have this quote from Booker? I forgot the fellow's first name. Maybe you could help me with that. Yeah,
Well,
Richard
yeah.
Booker. This comes from Christian Jews in Israel, page 81. He asks a series of questions.
This is good.
Yeah, why don't you read that?
Yeah. Mr. Booker writes this: please tell me, when in history was there ever a distinct people called Palestinians? Who were they, and when did they rule? What and who did they rule over? What was the name of their country, and what was the capital of their country? What were the boundaries of their country? Who were their presidents and prime ministers? What language did they speak? What literature did they leave behind? What was their currency? What historical records do we have of a Palestinian civilization? Where is the archaeological evidence of their existence, or any other information do we have about an historical Palestinian people? And I love this. I highlighted this when I wrote this down.
Yeah.
The truth is that there have never been a distinct people called Palestinians. There has never been a sovereign land called Palestine. Jerusalem has never in history been the capital of any Arab or Palestinian state. There is no Palestinian language or culture. I thought that was interesting, because there is no Palestinian people. It is a myth created after the Jews liberated Jerusalem in 1967. I got to read that again. It is a myth created after the Jews liberated Jerusalem in 1967.
See, if there was a continuous people group in that nation while Israel was not there called the Palestinians, you'd have a Palestinian language, Palestinian presidents, Palestinian archaeological evidence. You ask people today, well, who are the Palestinian prime ministers and presidents? They can't name a single one because the nation doesn't exist. This thing is a myth. It's on equal par with evolution, as I said before. It's on equal par with global warming because of what William James said. If you repeat a lie over and over and over again, and there's no countervailing argument, people will eventually believe it.
Yep.
Now, Mark Twain, in 1867, roughly, went to that part of the world just to observe it. And a couple years later, he wrote about what he saw in his book, Innocents Abroad. And let's read a few excerpts from those, from Innocents Abroad.
All right. This is what Mark Twain wrote. He says, referring to the land of Israel, a desolate country whose soil is rich enough, but is given over wholly to weeds. A silent, mournful expanse. A desolation is here that not even imagination can grace with the pomp of life and action. We never saw a human being on the whole route. There was hardly a tree or shrub anywhere. Even the olive tree and the cactus, those fast friends of a worthless soil, had almost deserted the country. He's talking about Israel.
Talking about Israel. And he went and toured that area, and he
Wow.
describes it as desolate.
Wow.
In fact, at one point in his writings, he says, I saw a goat, but it must have been a kind of goat that ate rocks to live, because I didn't see any vegetation.
Wow.
And when he went there, did he find some kind of thriving Palestinian civilization?
Never saw a human being on the whole route.
On the whole
he says.
route. And, really what you have in Israel is you have Bedouins in and out of that
Right.
area. But you don't have a nation state, a thriving nation state that existed while Israel was out of this land. And yet your average person out there thinks there was a Palestinian state that was removed.
Right.
And is never challenged, and people, just accept it as true. In fact, do you have this quote from Zahir Mahushain? It's an interview with a Dutch newspaper, March 31st, 1977. He is a PLO official. Do you have that quote?
He's all right. This is a PLO official, folks. Here it comes. Zahir Hussein. Here's what he says. The Palestinian people does not exist. Should I just stop there? No, let me keep going. The creation of a Palestinian state is only a means for continuing our struggle against the state of Israel for our Arab unity. In reality today, there is no difference between Jordanians, Palestinians, Syrians, and Lebanese. Only for political and tactical reasons do we speak today about the existence of a Palestinian people, and that was a PLO official.
Interview with a Dutch newspaper.
Wow.
Called Truo, March 31st, 1977. So this is not one of our guys.
No.
This is one of their guys, and he's saying, well, we made the whole thing up.
Yeah.
You know, it reminds me of the abortion issue. What they used to say over and over again, I can't remember the exact number, but the pro-abortion people would say, so many women died of back alley abortions before Roe versus Wade became they gave some number. Well, the guy that Bernard Nathanson, I think is what his name is, came to his senses about the abortion issue. He became pro-life decades after the abortion issue took root in America. And regarding that figure they repeated, he just said, I made the whole thing up because it sounded good and it helped our political cause. Now, surely there were Bedouins in the land that were sort of displaced when Israel came in, but they were basically put in internment camps, given the name Palestinians, called the refugees of a Palestinian state, not allowed to assimilate into any culture, used as pawns, as a propaganda tool to convince the world that Israel is doing something illegal. See, here's a quote from King Hussein, December 1981. Look at what he says.
Right, King Hussein, he's the king of Jordan. He said, the truth is that Jordan is Palestine, and Palestine is Jordan.
And read that quote right under it from Yasser Arafat, Interview with the New Republic, 1974.
Yes, our good friend Yasser Arafat. He said, what you call Jordan is actually Palestine.
See, the Palestinian state, I'll explain this in a minute, is Jordan, which would be to the east. So if Judea and Samaria was changed into a Palestinian state, that would be Palestinian state number 2. In fact, I might even call it Palestinian state number 3, because Gaza largely functions as a Palestinian state. So all of these guys are admitting that there is no such thing as a Palestinian state. This whole thing is a concoction for political purposes. It's there to repeat to the world community and get the world community to buy on to this idea that Israel is doing something illegal. So that's really the first important piece of information to understand.
Got to keep repeating that lie.
Over and over again. Now, let me take you to April 25th, 1920. The 4 principal victorious powers after World War I met. These were the victors in World War I. So they met. So there were 4 of them. This would include England, France, Italy, and Japan. The United States met as an observer because you remember the United States was not part of the League of Nations at that time. And they met in a place called San Remo, Italy. And they came up with, as these victorious powers, what is called a mandate for Palestine. So Israel's current legal right to the land comes from this San Remo ruling, 1920. Yet most people have never heard of this. Now, Daniel Horowitz in this piece talks about that ruling, and I'm looking here at quotes. We've got them numbered as number 2 and number 3. Can you read number 2 there?
Sure. This says, adopted by the League of Nations, that resolution recognized the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine and to the grounds for reconstituting their national home in that country. It called for the creation of a Jewish national homeland anywhere west of the Jordan River. And quote number 3 says, in Article 5 of the mandate, it explicitly states, the mandatory shall be responsible for seeing that no Palestine territory shall be ceded or leased to, or in any way placed under the control of the government of any foreign power.
Now, this is what these four victorious powers after World War I came up with by way of a formal, binding legal document. It's called the San Remo document, for lack of a better name. But notice the specific language, quote, acknowledging Israel's historical connection, or the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine, and to the grounds for reconstituting their national home in that country, close quote. And then down below, Article 5 of the mandate, quote, the mandatory shall be responsible. Now, in this case, Britain.
Yes.
Britain was given custodianship over that area to make sure that this Jewish state would be born.
Right.
But the mandatory shall be responsible for seeing that no Palestinian authority shall be ceded or leased to, or in any way placed under the control of the government of any foreign power, close quote, other than the nation of Israel. So what happened with San Remo is it enshrined into international law what is called the Balfour, see if I'm pronouncing that right. Yeah, yeah, you've got the pronunciation better than me. Balfour Declaration, 1917, which was British policy.
Yes.
Which was very pro-Israel. Part of British policy was to see the rebirth of a Jewish state, 1917. That's just British policy. Well, San Remo took British policy and actually enshrined it, if you will, into international law. If you put up image number 3, can we put that up? And I want to show people what else San Remo created in the process. They didn't just create a Jewish state legally. They also created Lebanon, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Jordan.
Yeah.
Now, Jordan got 77% of all of that territory. Jordan came out smelling like a rose.
Yeah.
But the nation of Israel was given, the Jewish people were given permission to rebuild their own land, if you will, or nation west of the Jordan River. This is not a matter of opinion, speculation, theology, politics. This is the force of international law. So San Remo is sort of looked at as the Magna Carta, if you will, for the modern state of Israel. And in July of 1922, the League of Nations adopted the San Remo Resolution. And this agreement was signed by 51 nations, including the United States of America, in 1922. So can you read, I think it's quote number 4.
4? Yes. This is from the same document. The legality of the 1922 mandate was adopted that same year by the U.S. Congress in H.J. I'm not sure what res stands for, but is that a
resolution?
Resolution, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I
think
think
Resolution 360.
Yeah, I think that stands for House Joint Resolution 360.
Ah, there we go. And signed by President Warren Harding. The newly created Arab country of Jordan attacked Israel in 1948, seeking to annihilate its inhabitants, and illegally occupied Judea and Samaria until 1967.
Okay, now we're getting to 1948.
Yeah.
We'll get to that in just a second. But what I want people to see is 1920. We have the San Remo Resolution.
Yeah.
It's adopted by the League of Nations in July of 1922. It's signed by 51 nations, and it becomes a House Joint Resolution 360, signed by Harding, President Harding, in 1922. This is now, what we just described is the last legally binding document covering the part of the world that everybody is saying Israel is doing something illegal in. Right. And I want people to understand that. And it's been considered the Magna Carta of the modern state of Israel. Now, people might be saying, well, I thought the League of Nations was disbanded. It was, and it was replaced by the United Nations.
Oh, joy.
Around, oh joy, 1945. But I want people to understand something. In Article 80 of the United Nations Charter, notice the specific language that was inserted. Article 80, and I think I'm there with quote number 5 from the Daniel Horowitz piece.
All right. Here's what it says. Once the League of Nations was disbanded and the United Nations formed in its stead, the international community agreed to maintain all agreements and not alter in any manner the rights whatsoever of any states or any peoples or the terms of existing international instruments to which members of the United Nations may respectively be parties. Goes on to say, this provision wasn't inserted by accident. Mm-hmm. It was known as the Jewish People's Clause at the time it was adopted in 1945 in order to enshrine the 1922 mandate into international law.
Right. So
Wow.
You have San Remo, you have the acceptance of it in the League of Nations. The League of Nations is disbanded, replaced by the United Nations. And they said, you know what? The United Nations one day might rescind the effects of San Remo, and so they put Article 80 into the UN Charter, which Horowitz actually calls, what does he call it here? The Jewish People's Clause?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was inserted specifically for the reason of not rescinding the legal effects of San Remo.
They must have seen the potentiality of that happening.
Yeah. And it says the United Nations cannot alter in any manner the rights whatsoever of any states or any peoples or the terms of existing international instruments to which members of the United Nations may respectively be parties. Oh. So what I'm trying to say is what happened with San Remo in 1920 and then 1922 carries on the force of international law as you move into the United Nations era. Mm-hmm. And so what I want people to understand is you can have whatever view you have about Israel. Biblically, we have our views. Politically, we have our views. What is not up for debate is the legality.
Right.
Israel has a legal right to be in that land. Certainly, everything west of the Jordan, they would have a legal right to, and certainly that would include building settlements, wouldn't
Absolutely.
it? In historically Jewish territories like Jerusalem, which has been part of the nation of Israel going back to the time of David, 1000 BC, and certainly in this area called the West Bank that we prefer the name Judea and Samaria. Now let me take you to 1948. This is the Jewish War of Independence. The state of Israel was born at that point, largely from the Magna Carta of a few decades earlier called San Remo. And the newly formed state of Jordan didn't like Israel, and so they attacked and they tried to exterminate the state. Yes. Israel survived against all odds. Nobody bet on the state of Israel surviving, but we know who was helping Israel,
Absolutely.
Right? God was.
Yes.
And at that point, Jordan illegally occupied Judea and Samaria. Right. See, all this talk about Israel is illegally occupying Judea and Samaria. Well, actually, Jordan took that area, which was given to Israel under international law, took it back into their own territory and borders, and they became the illegal occupiers. Right. So Israel had a state, but no Judea and Samaria from 1948 up until 1967. Let's flash forward to 1967 and what is now called the Six-Day War. Mm-hmm. And this was a defensive war, like the War of Independence was, where these nations came against Israel to blot her out. Right. And what happens, Israel miraculously survives against all odds. And when the dust settles, who now controls Judea and Samaria? The nation of Israel does. Mm-hmm. So at that point, Judea and Samaria, I believe, not become occupied territories. If I'm understanding my history correctly, they become liberated territories.
Liberated, that's right.
Because they got back what
That's right.
international law
That's exactly
gave
right.
them under San Remo.
That's exactly right.
Now, if we can put up again image number 1, and let's draw the listener's attention back to Judea and Samaria. That's that yellow area. Now, all the way around that area is an area that's called the Green Line. And what people say over and over again is these are 1967 borders. Israel needs to go back to pre-1967 borders, and that green line is borders that Israel needs to relinquish. Let me just say something here. There is no such thing as 1967 borders. San Remo
Right.
never
Yeah.
divided the land up
Yeah.
according to those borders. It simply gave the nation right to a nation west of the Jordan River. So the whole idea of 1967 borders is a myth.
Right.
What are those lines? What is that green line around Judea and Samaria? Those are armistice lines. They're not borders at all. You know what an armistice is? Mm-hmm. It's a ceasefire.
Mm-hmm.
So you sit down with, and this was established after the War of Independence, 1949, and then again in 1967. You sit down with, whoever was acting as aggressor against you, and you set out conditions for a ceasefire. Mm-hmm. That's what that green line is.
Right.
But what you hear over and over again from Obama, Kerry, the world community, the United Nations, no doubt what's coming up January 15th, is 1967 borders. Mm-hmm. Get back to 1967 borders. And what we're saying is 1967 borders is mythology.
Yes.
Just like the idea of a Palestinian state prior to Israel's entry into that land in 1948 is a mythology. So there is no Palestinian state west of the Jordan River. Mm-hmm. That's the point I'm trying to make. Mm-hmm. And what Israel has under San Remo, later reaffirmed under Article 80 of the United Nations Charter, is legal right to that land,
yes,
which, watch this very carefully, cannot be rescinded. Cannot be rescinded without Israel's approval. Mm-hmm. Horwitz does a great job bringing this up. Do you have citation number 6 in the Horwitz piece?
Sure do. Here it is. Although the UN has bloviated time and again about Israel's withdrawing from the region, those are merely recommendations and political arguments. They are not legal arguments, because once that land was allocated for the Jewish state by the binding charter of the UN, it cannot be rescinded without Israel's consent, any more than Florida can be taken away from the U.S. and be returned to Spain without our consent.
See, people want to chime in about whether Israel should give up Judea and Samaria. The reality of the situation is that's a political argument.
Right.
That's not a legal argument.
Right.
And I love the point he makes here. They are not legal arguments because once that land was allocated for the Jewish state by the binding charter of the UN, it cannot be rescinded without Israel's consent.
That's right.
Thomas Ice, a friend of mine, friend of ours,
yes,
the leader of the, executive director of the Pre-Trib Research Center, mm-hmm, has a book coming out called Christian Zionism. And he asked me to endorse his book, so I got an advance copy of it. So I don't want to read too much out of his book because I don't want to, give away the store. But he has a paragraph here on page 92 that I think is very helpful. And in this book, dealing with all of the arguments related to Israel, he has a chapter just on the legal system, rehearsing largely a lot of information, but in more detail of what Daniel Horwitz is mentioning in this article. And can you read just that one paragraph from page 92 of Thomas Ice's book, Christian Zionism, which is soon to be released?
All right. This is to wet your whistle to get
Yes,
the
sir.
book later, right? And this is what Tommy says. It is important one understands international law is not made by United Nations resolutions voted on by the General Assembly. International law can only be made by treaties or agreements between nations involved in a given matter. An armistice or agreement to stop a war does not qualify as international law. Thus, based on international law, Israel is not occupying Arab land. Such a view is a myth constantly repeated in the media without rebuttal, so that many think it is true.
So how is international law formed? It's formed by treaties or agreements between nations involved in the matter.
Yeah.
That's what those four victors after World War
Yes.
II, with the British Mandate and implementing the British Mandate, that's what they came up with because they were directly involved in the
Yes.
matter. The United Nations, pontificating from New York City about its left-wing political ideology and coming up with all of these resolutions, does not take on the force of international law. All it is their own personal, political, ideological argument. And see, what's happening is the anti-Israel forces are so successful and effective at propaganda that when people hear a political argument, the left conflates that political argument with a legal argument, and they keep repeating the phrase, occupied territories, violation of international law, that people think that the nation of Israel is actually doing something illegal.
Right.
And the whole thing is mythology, on equal par with evolution and global warming, as we have said, because it's repeated over and over and over again with no countervailing influence or argument, and people start to believe that this is true. So January 15th, this group of 70 nations can say whatever it wants to say. But it's not a law.
Right.
It's not an international law. It's a perspective or a political opinion. So what is our conclusion in this whole thing? And I challenge people to get this piece by Daniel Horowitz. Read Dr. Ice's book, Christian Zionism, when it comes out. Because we just gave you the surface, and you can get more into detail on some of these other sources. But the arguments against Israelis living in Judea and Samaria, building settlements in Jerusalem, those are merely political arguments. I don't think they're very good political arguments.
Right.
Sometimes those are theological arguments. I don't think they're very good theological arguments either, but they should not be confused with legal arguments. The nation of Israel, regardless of what your perspective is on this, is doing absolutely nothing illegally
Right.
or against international law.
Right.
In fact, there's a man that I actually had the privilege of hearing speak. His name is Jacques Gauthier. Say that 5 times fast. He is a Canadian international lawyer, and he spent 20 years of his life writing a 1,143-page PhD thesis at the University of Geneva in Switzerland on this topic. The title of it is Sovereignty over the Old City of Jerusalem, a study of the historical, religious, political, and legal aspects of the question of the Old City. And in his PhD thesis on page 848, listen to the conclusion that he comes to. Now keep in mind this is 20 years of research, and also keep in mind that his readers were hostile to his perspective. So he had to to get a dissertation accepted, you have to get your readers on board.
Yes.
So he had to cross every T and dot every I. He's a trained lawyer from Canada. He's meticulous in his footnoting. He had to be meticulous in his documentation in front of hostile readers. And notice the conclusion of his 1,143 PhD thesis that took him 2 decades of his life to compile.
Wow. Here's what he says. After our examination of the principles of international law pertaining to belligerent cooperation, we have concluded that Israel has the right to occupy territories under its control since 1967, including East Jerusalem and its old city, until a peace treaty is concluded.
So everything Israel is doing right now is legal.
Legal, legal, legal.
Absolutely legal. Judea and Samaria, legal. East Jerusalem, legal. Settlements, legal. The Obama administration, John Kerry, this group that's meeting on January 15th, can say whatever they want to say. But all they're giving is their own opinion on things.
Bloviating.
Bloviating, that's a great term. Israel is operating legally under the force of international law. And yet, your average person here today, listening, they may be learning this for the very first time because they've never heard this point of view come out. In fact, the left at times admits this. This is a interview. It's very fast. We're just going to read one little part of it between then Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who was Secretary of State under Bill Clinton. She had an interview with Matt Lauer October 1st, 1997, around this question of legality of Jewish settlements. And notice what she was forced to admit here. Can you read that excerpt to us?
Sure.
The exchange.
She says, I wasn't happy. We had a conversation, and I felt that going forward with those kinds of buildings was not helpful. It is not in any way, not part of what they can do, but they shouldn't do it. Matt Lauer responds, it's legal. And Secretary Albright says, it's legal. But I think that in this kind of an atmosphere, it's very important not to take actions that are viewed by the other side as creating more difficulties. Blah, blah, blah.
So she comes out with her point of view. Matt Lauer, who's no right-winger, by the way. He's a very liberal guy. He comes back and he says, but it's legal, and she's no right winger either. I mean, she's a member of the Clinton administration for crying out loud. She comes back and confesses it is legal, but I would prefer it another way. It contradicts my political ideology. Mm-hmm. So, folks, we talk a lot about the nation of Israel here. We usually come at it from the perspective of the Bible, because we believe God's Word has a lot to say about it. And you're getting a kind of a different vantage point today. We're coming at it from the perspective of the law. And we want you to be equipped to see through the propaganda.
Amen.
And I want you to understand that everything Israel is doing today is within the letter of the law. She's not violating any international law.
That's right.
She's operating under the full color of law. And it's like the Lord has done such a great work in regathering His special people for His end time program that He's even seen fit to work providentially in human history to make sure that everything is being done legally and by the book. Right. And so that's really what we're trying to get across here.
Amen.
And I did most of the talking. You no doubt have some things you want to add.
Well, I just think that this was such a timely discussion, and you mentioned a minute ago that there were people that likely haven't heard this viewpoint, and I would just like to encourage everyone that's listening to share this video, this discussion with your friends and family members. Get the word out, because there are so many people who really just have never heard this. And, we have an opportunity here to get the word out, so I encourage you to do that.
Well, usually this time we pause for questions. Do we get any questions? We didn't get any questions. We were so verbose.
Wow, what a great job you did today.
We didn't give the listeners an opportunity to even ask questions. Well, I'll tell you what, if you have questions and comments, even as you watch this on archives, as it's archived, go ahead and put your question and comment down there at the appropriate place, and because we could return to it next time we're together.
Amen.
So I'm excited.
Good stuff.
I think one of our responsibilities as Christians is to put on the helmet of salvation and the belt of truth and sort of see through the devil's lies.
Amen.
And allow us to present truth. And I love this avenue we have on Facebook where we can do this unfiltered.
Yes.
And so we praise God for the opportunity. Well, I just learned that next week our office will be closed again. So we will not be here Friday.
We really don't take all these breaks and
No.
go on vacation. It's a national holiday.
Right.
So.
And the following week I'm going to be traveling. So the week after that, I don't even know what week that is, we will be back and we will take up a conversation that we left behind back in end of 2016 related to ministry philosophy.
Yeah.
So
That'll be good.
We'll get back to that subject. But once January 15th hits, folks are going to hear a lot about this issue of illegal settlements, and
Yes.
we want to fortify your minds and equip you for that. Make sure to share, like us on Facebook, tell your friends about this, and we just got some good news.
We got
did
one
get a question
question
in, so we're happy about that. So I'm
Is that
gonna,
a ringer?
Robbie.
yeah, Robbie Dean. Here
It's a ringer.
Robbie Dean is writing in. So he goes, so now Robbie Dean knows a lot about this subject. So I don't know why he's asking me anything.
Why isn't he here?
I should be asking him a question. He actually gives a beautiful presentation tracing Zionism through what we would call unbelieving Jews wanting to rebuild their nation, and evangelical Christians, and he traces that movement coming together simultaneously in both branches, and
That's
he
something.
demonstrates that there's no way this could be a fluke. This has to be the hand of God.
Amen.
So I'll read the question, and Jim, you're going to go ahead and answer. He says, so why doesn't the Israel government support this view?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I was of the impression that Netanyahu did support the view. And according to some of the things Tommy says in his recent book, I was of the impression that Netanyahu does support the view. And so I'm sort of the perspective that they are supporting the view. So I'm kind of at a loss regarding how to answer that particular question. Maybe some of them don't support the view because they're more socialistic in nature.
Yeah.
But I was sort of the impression that Netanyahu did support the view. Maybe Robbie can write back and give us the right answer on Facebook, and we can read it on the air. Sorry, Robbie, that's the best I can do with that. Some resources that will help you with all of this. We recommend this book here called Christians, Jews, and Israel: Standing Together in Troubled Times by Richard Booker. I would recommend to you the Daniel Horowitz piece published in Conservative Review called Israel's Right to Build Homes is Settled Under International Law. And I would also recommend, if you're into reading dissertations, the Jacques Gautier dissertation, and I gave the title of that earlier, so it's a lengthy title. Thomas Ice, Christian Zionism, the Daniel Horowitz article, the Jacques Gautier dissertation, and this book here by Richard Booker. And if you were to kind of grab hold of some of those resources, you kind of get a handle on what's going on here legally regarding the Middle East. But, you know, I thought if I ever wrote my own book on this, a great title of it would be Myths of the Middle East. Because this is a wide-scale myth that's being disseminated, and we're trying to, expose it.
Now, I understand that Robbie replied back, but should we tell him we have time, or we're out of time? Do you have his reply?
They have it.
Oh, they have. Everybody can see it on
Everybody
Facebook.
can see
Okay.
it, okay.
Well, we'll have to go look at Facebook to see what he put, so
Yeah.
we can find out what the answer is.
So he asked what's called a rhetorical question.
Yes.
A question where the answer is assumed. So he went ahead and put the answer down there so people can see it.
I'm
there
glad, so I can go find
on
out what it
Facebook.
is.
Yeah, good. Well, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this brief broadcast that we did. I hope it's brief. Happy New Year, and we're going to see you a couple weeks down the road, and we're going to continue to talk about ministry philosophy issues. So until then, we're signing off. We love you. God bless.
God bless.
And goodbye.